We've been talking about emotions, and I want to sum up a little bit here and perhaps offer a few challenges to you about this topic because it's a vast one. And hope you understand we can't cover every avenue of this, but I tried to take the major emotional reactions, and that's exactly what we're talking about when we talk about emotions. They're the essence, you could say, encapsulate the challenge of the process of yoga, of coming to what yoga is all about, which is the overcoming of the reactive process, the neutralization of the waves of feeling of the heart. And of course, you have positive feelings and you have negative feelings. And when we talk about overcoming negative emotions, we're dealing with the negative feelings we have. But I want to say also positive feelings are also, although they're not as painful. I don't think we suffer from the pain of that we do with negative emotions, but nevertheless they're binding too, because whether they're positive or negative, they're binding us to that feeling aspect of the heart which is going outward. And so you could say emotions are simply disturbed feelings that are directed outward into the world through our ego. So they're ego affirming. And for the yogi, of course, that's the problem. And ego affirmation tends to maybe in the moment might feel good and it might seem right, but in the long run, ego involvement, ego attachment ultimately leads us into karmic action, the round of life and death, and having to learn lessons over and over again. And we know all of that as yogis, what that's all about. But we're trying to overcome that. And we're trying to not necessarily even initially here, eventually we do want to go beyond emotion, but initially we're wanting to become aware of that, aware of the emotions and be able to gain a handle on them. You might say, if we can gain a handle on, let's say, a negative emotion, if we work at it, we can begin to soften that negative emotion, perhaps even turn it around into a positive one. Now, again, eventually we want to throw both of them into the bin, but nevertheless, it's better to have, to moderate it, soften it. So that's what we're really trying to do. And some of the great, and I'd like to focus a little bit in summation because there's many things that we could say cause this. But in the time allotted, the things that really at its root are causing of these is usually having to do with attachment of some sort. Now, attachment not necessarily in just attachment to things, which we think, oh, I lost my XYZ or whatever it is, but it's attachment to views of life, attachment to certain things being the way they are. And we react. Something is taken away from us. And think about this. Let's say you're in a relationship and that relationship ends. Very painful, and it causes a lot of emotion. But ultimately, there's an element of attachment there as well. Attachment to perhaps the circumstances, attachment to that other person, attachment to my security, my self-esteem, all of these things, in each of which may engender a particular manifestation of emotion, but at the root, it's wanting things to be a certain way, and when they aren't a certain way, we it's painful. And so attachment is at the root of that. Think of anger. Why do we get angry? Things didn't turn out the way we wanted them to. We wanted them to, and if you trace it back, you see that there's much of this in there, and what. If we can learn, I guess you could say, if we can learn to train ourselves to have more of a relaxed attitude to the loss, the pains, the things that happened, are very basic reactions to life. And you might say adopt an attitude of a relaxed acceptance of life as it is. There's a lot less stress and the reactive process is moderated. There's an old prayer. You may have heard this. It's been said in one form or another. Says, God, Lord, Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. the courage to change the things I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think this sums it up. What can I, because otherwise we're saying to accept life as it is doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to change things, but we have to accept the reality as it right now. And what is our reaction to this? And I think this is really at the heart of what Paramhansa Yogananda was meaning here is his encouragement to us to be even-minded and cheerful in all circumstances, to be able to do that, which again is attacking that reactive process. And I think this reactive process is the measure of our progress as a devotee. People ask, am I making spiritual progress? You may have great visions, or you may have this, or you may have all sorts of manifestations, but if you're reactive, and you can't control that reactive process, that's something to look at. That's really the measure, to be able, whatever happens in this world, your ability to remain centered within yourself, calm, reminded, cheerful in all circumstances. But I emphasize that's not being resigned. It's when you have that you can then take the action necessary to do whatever's needed. And or you could say it in another way, is learning to engage in life with a positive attitude. And the faster that we can learn to accommodate reality as it is, the happier and more effective we'll be to be able to bring solutions in. And so in this vein, I thought for this, I wanted to mention a couple of things in this last class. I think it's important for us, if we want to make progress, we can't just think about these things philosophically. We have to test ourselves. Or you might say, we don't really test we observe the tests in ourselves. It's life that tests ourselves. But in other words, don't avoid these tests. To welcome tests that come to our ego, that come to our attachment, that come to those things in life that stimulate the reactive process, particularly, let's say, the negative reactive process. Can we accept what comes to you? And realize now, as you do this, you're going to fail many times. Well, if you don't fail, how are you going to make improvements on yourself? So don't be too hard on yourself if you begin to notice things. This is the process of learning. And you could say to be too hard on yourself is an expression of self-involvement. We have to take that little bit of back up, look at ourselves as, take the position of the observer. And as opposed to, which often happens, don't push it under the rug. I remember not too long ago, because I teach and I counsel and so on, people come to me and ask me things, and they'll ask me advice. And I've said this many times before, but when I joke that when people come to ask me advice, what they're really wanting is support, not real good advice. And in responding to people, I have to be very careful, because you can't really give people advice if they don't really want to hear it. And you can, encourage them a little bit, and you have to be tactful how you give people advice. But I remember somebody came to me and they wanted advice, and I forgot that. And I just said, okay, you might want to work on this XYZ, and this person says, but that's not true. I'm not like that, and immediately I know, oh God, do you have that reaction? I'm not like that. That's not me. And the fact of the matter is, sometimes you aren't like that. You might say you've been falsely accused, but I guess you could say what I'm saying here is, for example, can you take criticism? Can you how do you react when somebody criticizes you, perhaps makes fun of you, and the thing is, whether it's fair or not, because sometimes we're criticized for things that we didn't even do, or it wasn't true. And you feel this impulse, I got to set the record straight here. Well, sometimes we do want to set the record straight just for the objective efficiency of life. But if you have that impulse, whether it's fair or not, it's not what I'm not talking about the actual criticism. I'm talking about the reaction that we have within ourselves. I remember a situation where we had a manager, and here in the Ananda work, and this person thought pretty highly of themselves, I think. And there was somebody lower, and actually this happened in India. And so there was somebody lower on the scale. And unfortunately, it was also a little bit of casteism here was involved. This person was a lower caste person, just a laborer and worker. This person was a manager, you say. And this manager was not really talking right, behaving right. He was abusive a little bit, dismissive, of a person of lower status. And this person, and I say, Hari Bol to this guy, he spoke up and he says, that's absolutely not fair. And what you're not telling the truth, and call this fellow out, this manager out like that in a very public setting. And this manager got really upset, and he got really upset and started yelling at this fellow. And here was the part that it was sad to see, because this manager totally embarrassed himself. And I don't even know if the criticism was true or not, but the way he reacted, everybody went, oh man. And it caused that person a great deal of pain. Not the pain of that criticism. If he had just taken that criticism in good humor, good spirits, and saying, yeah, I guess maybe you're right, I'm sorry, it would have gone fine. But he dug a deeper hole. And I think that's the thing, is when you're criticized, there's a saying, if you find yourself having dug yourself into a deep hole in life, the first thing to do is stop digging. And digging is starting to defend yourself. And Swami Jaya Kriyananda had this policy. He refused to defend himself, in that way. And that was perhaps sometimes it would have been a good to defend himself, but he didn't want that ego reactive process to happen in himself. And I'd counsel that as well. If you see yourself and test this comes about by being tested. And it's especially galling when you know the truth of the thing and you're being unfairly criticized. But who are we to judge whether it's fair or not? Sometimes we're not the best judge of that, but some objective facts we can say, well, I really didn't do that. But Swami used to tell, he says, even if it's like that, just take it. And it's good for your ego to learn to be able, because it's not about whether it was true or not. It's about what did it do inside of us. Now, that's a tough test, but just generally, criticism in general, how do we react, whether it's fair or not? Is there another fellow I remember, he could take criticism from people that were his mentors, you may say. So I could actually criticize this person and say, you should do, that's not right, you should do this, that. And that person, this fellow could take that. But if one of his peers criticized, he would get upset. They would get upset. It was like having an open sore on your arm and somebody touches it and you're very sensitive. And I think this is what we as devotees need to learn, is be less sensitive, and be able, and I think humor is very helpful here. The other thing is how do you react to loss? And I think that's when I was saying earlier about that relationship example. That's an example of loss, because loss attacks that element of attachment. You lose something. Somebody stole something from you, or perhaps took from you. Now, you could say this example I just gave you, he experienced loss too. He lost loss of face, you see, loss of a sense of dignity, and that painful. So he was attached to his good opinion of himself and others' good opinion of him. But it's also material loss, the loss of a loved one, death and dying, relationship breakups, the loss of status in a workplace, ill treatment, all of these things. Now, the outward circumstances don't mean that we need to address them. Yes, we do. I'm speaking about the feeling that we have. Oh my God, like I've given this example maybe earlier in this thing. I had a motorcycle stolen from me, and I noticed the motorcycle, and I loved my motorcycle. And when I realized it was gone, I felt this pain in my heart, and I noticed it right away. And I just said, okay, there's a test. And it took me about 15 minutes to get to the point where Divine Mother, you're playing with me here, but it was gone, and I was able to accept it. Now, all sorts of loss. So I don't just mean material. Loss of our expectation of what we were going to be in life, how it was going to go, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now we have to do something about it, but it's accepting those. Can we joyfully, just not resignationally, if that's a word, can we joyfully meet our tests? Or can we turn that feeling into an upward direction? And as yogis, we are taught to look, to be aware and to feel of our feelings, very important aspect of our life, and learn to feel, where is that energy going here? And can we turn that feeling upward in times of difficulties? And it takes a moment. It's a challenge. And you could say it brings in, at that time, the devotee brings in the divine. And you might say, God, in which when I lost that motorcycle, I said, Divine Mother, what are you doing? And I brought God into the picture. And because I fully expect, I approach whatever comes in life, if I can, with a joyful expectation that whatever happens in life, thank you, God. If you can have that, thank you, God. I know what's happening for my life here. I don't understand it. I don't even like it, maybe, but your hand is at play in what's going on here. And you're with me in whatever. And now this is easy to say, but test yourself. Can you say, thank you, God, to whatever circumstances come? But practice it. You see, if we practice it, and not just verbally, but in the heart, we're speaking, I joyfully expect God to come to me in everything in my daily life, live my life with him. And I know God is not going to respond immediately. It's been my experience, but in time, you begin to feel that divine presence. And I would ask you, can you meditate in joyful expectation of his coming when you meditate? Try to adopt that attitude. And he's coming. And it's like the story of Sabari, which I'm not going to tell because I have limited time. But you all know, and Ram's coming to Sabari, very famous. It was time she was ready at all times. Keep calling him, as the song goes, whether he replies or not. Keep calling him. Remember that story that is in the autobiography of Sri Yukteswar, when Master leaves the ashram because he wants to go to the Himalayas, and Master says it was silly, a total misunderstanding. He was looking for God in the mountains when the mountain of a God realized saint in the form of Sri Yukteswar was right before him. But nevertheless, he runs away from the ashram, goes up the mountains, has many adventures. And Master actually said to Swami Kriyananda, he says, in the book, it makes it seem like it was just a little bit of time. A week or two he was gone. He says, but he was gone for a long time, many, many months. He was away. And then he went, but finally, he has that experience with Ram Gopal Muzumdar, who, sends him pretty much, commands him to go back to his guru. And says, that little temple room, your little room upstairs, let that be your Himalayan cave and find God there. And so he goes back, and when he sees Sri Yukteswar, he says to him, you must be disappointed in me. And Sri Yukteswar says, no, why would I be disappointed in you? Nothing you can do. I have no expectations. In other words, he says, I would not bind you that way. I'm not tying you. He says, if you want to leave, you leave. I have no expectations other than my hope for you and your journey to God. In other words, my joy does not depend, Sri Yukteswar's joy did not depend on anything his disciple. Now he had hopes for him, sure, but if those hopes were dashed, it's in God's hands. He was not going to be affected. Now, this was a mark of acceptance of others, acceptance of other people in our life. Do other people bother you? Do other people disappoint you? Do other people, make you angry? In other words, does it affect your love for that person? Love the person, not the deed, is the motto here. And so this is what we what we're emphasizing in it's all a process of a negative reactive process, negative emotion. And we have to watch those in ourselves. And as we watch them, we then have to address them. And you might say calm acceptance, but your question comes up is how? How does one keep a state of relaxed acceptance, of joyful positivity in the midst of difficulty in life? And I think there's a number of things to be addressed here, but I think it starts with using, or first, let's see how you react, but what's your measuring stick? I think the measuring stick is calmness. Calmness in the heart, calmness in our actions. It's the measuring scale for testing your feelings about whether you are emotional or not. Like that one person I mentioned, somebody says, "Oh, I don't have that." And you can see right away that, and you might say, "I'm not emotional. I'm calm and even-minded." And when you realize they're not, and then, but why are they saying that? They're just fooling themselves. If we can learn this, we begin to deepen our calmness. True calmness, remember, is expansive if it's rightly understood. And whenever you have expansion, you also have joy. So that's importance of developing this calmness in the midst of life's storms. And this takes practice, of course. But be careful. We cannot attain calmness by closing ourselves to our feelings. You see, feeling remains, but that feeling needs to be directed upward. And that's really what we're trying to do. And you can't, when it's in turmoil, it's very difficult to direct it upward. You first have to calm the waves, put the oil on the water and calm the waves. And then in that calmness, you can then begin to direct it upward. So it's moderation, calming your likes and your dislikes, which is an everyday. Now look at yourself, likes and dislikes. How do you feel? What are they? Now, it doesn't mean, and I've said this before, I don't mean to become numb. I say, turn your likes and dislikes into preferences. That's the first step. Now, maybe you shouldn't even have preferences, but I think being human, we like one thing more than another. But again, I said but we're not attached to it. As I've said, I prefer this flavor ice cream over that flavor ice cream. I prefer this color over that color, but I don't hate the other. I mean, if that's what life gives me, okay, fine. My preference was not, life didn't agree with my preference, but I'm still happy, fine. And so consequently, see if you can do that. The first step, eventually, of course, maybe even go beyond preferences. But if you just say, I have no likes and dislikes, I think you're not being honest with yourself. And slowly, you begin to accept whatever comes. You don't have any negative preferences. You kind of don't like that. But if it comes, okay, I can deal with it. Whatever comes, I can deal with it. And it starts, you could say, calmness begins with probably peace. We have peace, and we have calmness. We speak about an aspect of God. I think we start with peace because but calmness is more dynamic. But peace is the cessation of restlessness. You see, restless mind, restless body, restless emotions, and it's what we experience first. And of course, this is what meditation does for us. One of the first things we begin to experience is we begin to first develop peace. And it's peace positively dove into. It's very healing. And it's wonderful. The sense of release and freedom from restlessness is extremely pleasant. But then when we have that, then it allows us to go deeper and deeper into what you could say is calmness. And in this aspect, but start with peace first. And whatever you can do to create that peaceful feeling in your environment, in your reactions to other peaceful, you can at least express peace, even though maybe you don't feel it so much in your heart. But if you verbalize your restlessness or your ill feelings, if you express them, you're binding yourself more. So stop the expression of ill feeling, stop the verbalization of ill feeling, try to bring peace to those elements, and then now the thoughts and those inner things are a little more difficult, but you have to get the outer expressions under control first, and then you go deeper and deeper. And you could say that the ability, and this is something that Swamiji used to say, and maybe Master said it too. He says, develop the power of calmness, because its calmness is going to be the ability to be able to remain in a state of calmness is what ultimately allows us to overcome Maya. We have to, and this is what Buddha, and when Master or Swami would talk about Buddha, he would say he delved into that deep calm, and it gave him the power to overcome any test that Mara threw at him, and anything that that Mara tried to pull, disturb his calmness, and that gave him the power ultimately to ascend to a deeper state of consciousness. And that feeling resides in the heart. So I guess what we're saying is that feeling, negative feeling, is going out, downward, going out into the ego, expressing that way. What we want to do is we want to try to bring it back in and ultimately try to turn it upward. And this is what we do in meditation. It's often hard to do it in the actual field of battle out in the worldly situation, but you could say, and this is what Swamiji used to say, is visualize when you're meditating the strings of feelings in the heart, positive or negative. They go out, they're going out into the world. He says, mentally you could cut those strings, or perhaps like a fisherman, reel those strings back in, away from out, when you've got them back in control a little bit, then redirect them upward into a positive goal, into positive feelings. And if you can offer your heart's feelings to the point between the eyebrows and you're meditating is very good. Develop these feelings, and as you develop them upward with a calm mind, remember that feeling is in the heart. Freedom is up here in the brain, but between the two, we have to pass in the chakras up through the Vishuddha chakra, which is the seat of calmness. See, so we pass that energy up through the calmness of the spine up into the spiritual eye. And if you're not calm, you can't get it up. You can't get that up into the spiritual eye. So you could say too, now there's a little bit of a seemingly contradictory. On the spiritual path, if we want to achieve our goal, there has to be intense fervor. You're not going to get there being lazy. And emotion is somewhat associated with that fervor. So you have to have fervor, even it's a little bit emotional. You see, it's better than the opposite of no fervor, no intensity of devotion. So you have to. So don't. Sometimes people say, "Well, I want to be calm and even-minded, and I want to be very still, and I don't want to have that fervor because it might have a little bit of emotion to it." Master would say, that let it be. That's okay. It's better than the opposite, but we need to then go beyond that. And so there's that story where devotee came to Master because one of the fellow devotees in the meditation would get so fervent in their devotion that they would start expressing it outwardly in body motion and sometimes rolling on the ground, doing all sorts of things. And this other devotee complained to Master about that. He said, "Well, that's not right." And Master said, "No, let him be. Let him be. He's feeling devotion. You should roll on the ground in your love for God. You're so fervent." Well, he said that to that devotee, but then he called the other devotee in, the one who was rolling on the ground. He says, "Don't be so outwardly expressive. Your devotion is going out. You need to draw that devotion into the heart and up to the brain. So don't express like that." You see, it depends. What do we need? Maybe for that first devotee, he needed to roll on the ground in divine devotion. It was helpful to him. So we don't know. Each individual has to come to this himself. But Master said also, any genuine determination will have calmness behind it. If you're really, really determined to get something, you have to center yourself. And you got to center yourself, no, I'm going to do it. But if it's outwardly, that determination is outwardly expressed, it's not as deep. If you're really calm and then you're intent, nothing's going to stop me. And then a great power comes from that point of calmness. And, I think we also need to remember that habits are important in this. Is we've developed the habit of expressing our feelings emotionally. And again, we reel it in, changing habits. We come to being able to redirect that energy because again, person says, well, if I'm not emotional, I'm going to be dull. No. It's the same emotion, the same energy behind that outward emotion simply means it needs to be detracted or directed in another direction. There's a story. Well, or to finish that thought before I tell the story, any qualities, if you want peace, you want calmness, or whatever, you want courage, you want strength of will, any qualities you meditate upon and deeply will become stronger. So if you try to feel even a little bit of peace, even a little bit of calmness, even a little bit of strength or power, you meditate and you meditate and meditate on them, and they will grow in strength and power. So assume those qualities that you want to enhance in your life and take them into your meditation. First, get as calm and then as you can, and then go deep into them. And you could say also, in that same vein, that the whole spiritual path really is a matter of removing those obstacles that are between me and God, you and God, us and God. Those little things that we have, emotions being one of them, the strongest one. And I want to conclude just with a little story from Master's life, in that when we read before he was Master, before he was Swami Yogananda even, he, as a boy, Mukunda, he had lots of friends. He was very magnetic. So a lot of friends came to him. And to some degree, these friends actually were future disciples of his. They were his disciples even as children. And he would guide them. And there's a story of a friend of his, young boy named Jotin. And I forget who Jotin became. He became a monk. Anyway, it slips my mind. But anyway, Jotin was subject to fits of anger. He was reactive, and he could not hold a job. And the reason was his boss would criticize him for, not doing the job very well or whatever it might be. And he would get angry. And whenever he'd get angry, he would slap that person. So I can imagine he would slap his boss. Well, he didn't last very long in that job and the next job, and that, because his anger, he couldn't control it. And he went to Mukunda, and he said, I just don't know what to do about this. I can't control this. And Yogananda counseled him about this. And basically he said came to this point. He said, because Jotin was a practitioner of meditation, because he was, all the boys following Master would, participate in his spiritual practices also. And Jotin meditated, and Mukunda told him, he says, while meditating, he had this bad habit. He should offer the habit upward. And by doing that, how do that? He says, surround that bad habit or that bad tendency with divine energy and offer it upward, and let that energy of, the upward energy, the divine energy, let that energy, and feel it if you can, wash away the habit you wish to destroy. You're offering it into the divine positive energy, and you're being washed, and that habit's being washed away and destroyed. And so this went, and so he decided to do this, and he was given encouragement. Master encouraged him, and he practiced, and because he was a devotee, and I think later he did become a monk. And so anyway, then when he came back, he came back to Mukunda sometime later, probably months or so later. He says, "I think I've overcome that habit. I've overcome that habit." But Master didn't accept it right away, and so he said, "Okay, well that's good." And so then, in his circle of friends, the boys, he knew all of them well, and he asked them, those who knew Jyotin and knew of his bad habit, to test him. And so they would go up to him and find very clever ways to insult him or to criticize him or to make him angry, like he would get before. And one by one, all the boys came back to Mukunda and said, "No, I couldn't make him happy. I couldn't get him to be angry." And so Mukunda said, Jyotin then told him, "You have overcome that habit," which actually turned out to be true. And so if you have another way is, and try this in meditation, but another way is you have a quality you want to overcome, something, think of the opposite quality you want to develop, because sometimes just concentrating on that negative quality just strengthens it. It makes it dynamic in your consciousness. Now, Jyotin here, he didn't just he was taking that quality and offered it up into the light. The other thing you do is think of the opposite quality that you want to develop that will neutralize that. And so Jyotin didn't meditate on anger, he meditated on the thought of peace. So if anything you meditate on, again, coming back to my previous point, you will make that quality stronger. So think of the opposite. You don't even have to think of the negative things, because all of a sudden you realize somebody tests you, life tests you, and you didn't get angry. You didn't get downcast when life didn't turn out the way you hoped it would. The hurts and pains, they're not there quite so much anywhere, and they begin to moderate it. Now, yes, this is a gradual, gentle process. You hope things would have turned out better, and sometimes there's a mild sadness that they didn't turn, but you realize that there's something deeper here. You've got that divine friend with you, and you know, it's wise for the devotee to remember this. The world inevitably will disappoint us. It's kind of a sad thing to say in some sense, but there's a reality there. We're going to be disappointed if we put our faith in the world, but God will not disappoint us. And we have to keep that in mind and actuate that in our consciousness. Rest our faith in the divine. And enjoy, of course, that would mean to enjoy the positive things of this world, but realize everything passes. And in the end, especially this lifetime comes to an end, everything has to be given back. And how did it affect us? Did we leave this world on a higher plane than we came into it? Did we learn anything in this life? Were we able to affect any change in ourselves, maybe even be a positive influence on others? These are the important things in life. And so let's come back next week. And I'd like to hear your comments. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, your reactions. And you could start, put things in the chat box. And I hope Barakeel will record those. They can take the notes down, Baraji, and we'll come back to those questions next week. And I'd like to hear from you. So God bless all of you, and I hope to see you 1 week from today. Joy to all of you.